Thank
Excellent.
you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. All right, so let's dive into some of the questions that we got. So we want
Mhm.
to talk about some of the best practices for brands when they're working with disabled individuals, whether those are influencers, models, public figures. So to get us started, obviously we probably can't name names or kind of call people out, but could you share your most positive experiences working with brands and maybe how you knew that they were open to working with accessibility and inclusion in mind? Because I feel like this is something that's not yet, on the ground floor of, yeah, everybody should be thinking about these things.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, thankfully, I've had quite a, first of all, hello everybody watching. um, for me personally, I feel like I know that the brand is doing the right thing from the moment they reach out. They're the one I don't actually kind of go around scouting myself or kind of promoting myself to brands. But like, hi, my name is Clara. Da, 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 da. I don't actually do that. So majority of the time, like they either their PR or the brand themselves come directly to me. They contact me. They've seen me on Instagram, and that may be one of the reasons why they decided to kind of reach out for me to work with them, etc., etc.
I like that. So when you get this initial impression, are there kind of like hallmarks, certain language that they use, or anything that really gives you that kind of initial impression of like, oh, okay, this could be a really great partnership. They clearly, have best intentions. They want me involved. Is there anything that you look for?
I mean, one of the things, when there's if they're talking about their background and who they've worked with, and in terms of like, they want to be inclusive and they want to be diverse with the people that they work with, then that's always, tick tick. That's always positive signs because it looks like that's what they actually believe and they want to do. They're not just ticking a box. They, especially for those that are looking for long-term relationships, this like there's many brands that I have like connection with where it's not just, oh, the one-off, like it's just, oh, this is something we want to be building. We want we tend not to just work with like influencers once, for example. They want to, this is, a start of a friendship, a relationship. Many of the brands I work with and have worked with, I worked with them for over a few years. So it's, and it's great because at the same time you feel like you are in part of the family. You're part of the team. They respect you. You respect them. They respect your worth. And more importantly, those keywords. How much is your fee when it comes in the email? Like,
Yes.
because because at the end of the day, honey, we all got bills to pay.
I've
Like,
never met anybody that lives on water and sunshine. So
yeah,
we
and
do work because
what
we need the money, right?
exactly. And while I enjoy it, I enjoy what I do, but it is work as well. But there's no harm in enjoying the work that you do. So I think that's very important, to be honest. And
Oh, you're preaching to the choir on this one. I love my job. I have a great time with my job, but you're right. It is still work.
it is, yeah, and I feel that it's important for brands to kind of pay for your services that you are giving them. And at the end of the day, whether it's, if it's if an influencer job, they are advertising. You wouldn't go to, HBO or Disney and ask them, can you put on an advert, please? And oh, by the way, it's for free. We'll give you an outfit. It doesn't necessarily have the same kind of tone. It doesn't. And I feel like if they are really serious, then they would definitely have a budget and have something in mind. Or even if your fee slightly out of their budget, they kind of have some form of negotiation skills. So I think
Mm.
there's definitely that as well. Sometimes you do get brands that come to you and they talk about, oh, like inclusivity and diversity and blah blah blah, etc. etc. But then at the same time, when you look at their shoots, you don't see it.
Yeah.
But they're giving you all the jargon in the email, but they don't want you to do it for free. And I feel that's where sometimes certain brands kind of fall by the wayside with that. Like, walk the walk, wheel the wheel, practice what you preach, you know?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
I love this. So,
yeah.
we talked about some of the more positive experiences have been like Could you share an experience that was maybe less than stellar, that was, either via working with a brand or the way they reached out to contact you?
Yeah, so I have, I'm also a model, and in the past, I have gone for castings for brands and get there, and there's steps. Like the casting studio has stairs. Now, I know sometimes some people are able to get out and make one or two steps, but you can't automatically presume. Now, you want to be diverse and be inclusive in your casting for a modeling job, but yet there's like 6 flights of steps and there's no way for me to get into the room. And they're like, oh, I didn't even think of that, and it's those kind of things that kind of let that down. I've had, I've had to be, I had to casting in the local coffee shop, things like that. And also, I was going for a shoot. Now, the studio they hired was all accessible. It had all the things that's needed. But unfortunately, when it came to the fitting was at their office, and they totally forgot these 5 steps to get into the office. Mm-hmm. And there's only one I said to them, is it accessible? So is it accessible, right? And they were like, oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm like, and it was like, come in away, we'll figure it out. Anyway, so I went there, and then when I went there, I was like, okay, we'll definitely not figure it out. We've been actually having fitting for lingerie. So it's not even like a jacket.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's a lingerie shoot. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Like, you need to check that my bra sizes, all the sizes are all correct. And I'm like, and they were like, oh, what about if we did it here by the front door? I was like, no. And then so they had to go and ask, like, there was a shop nearby if we could use their changing room. But then I couldn't fit in their changing room, so then they had to, if they kind of screened off like a whole area so that I can actually have this fitting. So when the shoot came, the shoot went perfectly well because it was all accessible. They had somebody on hand to assist me, not that I needed it, but that was good in a way. It was just the logistics. I feel sometimes, brands might feel like wheelchairs go upstairs.
Yeah, that's kind of boggling my mind. Now, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but at least in the US, because of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, things like wheelchair accessibility are supposed to be mandatory for public buildings, especially if you are a business. It's definitely, accessibility is a big thing. And so you're right, there are tons of times where people just don't think about it because it's not part of their daily lives. But this is something that's supposed to be required by law here, and you still don't see it everywhere.
To be is the key.
Yeah.
The key word is supposed to be.
Yeah. So think about
it seems like there's always some kind of loophole for it to be. Hey, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
it's
and the idea of like
and all this,
that attitude of like, well, we'll just figure something out, or will this be okay? It's not a great comparison, but it kind of smacks of the same thing when you have somebody with dietary restrictions or somebody vegetarian or vegan coming to dinner. And it feels like that afterthought of like, well, salad's good for you, right? Like we're planning a 3-course meal for
totally
everyone
understand.
else.
Yeah. I'm being a vegan myself. I totally get. No, like, what about if we just take off the meat? I'm like, no, you could just not have.
No, that's not the point. We'll just eat around it. No, that's not the point. Yes. Well, and I like that, you said it's very important, I think, to share these kinds of things when things don't go well, because a lot of times the lessons you can take from them are incredibly valuable and useful for the rest. Like you said, the fitting didn't go great, but the shoot was made more accessible. So I like this idea that, even if they do start off on maybe the wrong foot, brands can make this up to people and can step up and show that they're listening, right?
Yeah, I mean, subsequently, I've actually gone back and I've shot in that same studio quite a few times as well with other brands. So it's definitely, it was just the initial, just like certain little things that they just kind of overlooked and they've mishapped. In terms of other things, I find sometimes it seems to be like a disconnect between the PR side and the casting side. So the casting is the people that So the fashion, you have the fashion, you have a brand, they have a fashion department, they have a new collection coming out. We need to cast models for the adverts for like autumn winter, for example. And they go out and they look for models, and they, agencies or whatever, they might sometimes they find them on, via social media, etc. And what the problem is that I find that there seems to be a disconnect, because while the brand is saying, oh yeah, we want to be diverse, the casting director and the casting agency might not necessarily be at one with what is required. And then when you have the PR side. Now, the PR, whether it's in-house or external, they are hearing the brand. They want to be diverse. We want a diverse mix of, and they go out and they look for influencers that can kind of fit that. And this is where the problem is sometimes, where you say, where I said earlier about it's great that they have given the lingo, but when you look on their website, it doesn't necessarily quite match up, because the two departments don't necessarily work together. I have been turned down for, well, we didn't actually ask for a disabled model. I know, you just asked for a model, and I'm a model. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And then, but then at the same time, while I've been turned down for that brand by the casting agency and the casting director for that particular brand PR, I have worked with so many times on influencer campaigns. So it's like the two necessarily sometimes are not meeting together. There is the brand have an idea of being diverse and being inclusive, but sometimes while that it is picked up by the PR people, so that people like me, I have the opportunity to work with them as an influencer, I've not been able to have the opportunity to work for them as a model, because the casting director is not necessarily, they're casting their eye. Yeah, they're casting their eye and their vision for the brand. And it's not, sometimes the two doesn't necessarily click or gel together.
Well, that makes sense. If the values or the main goals aren't necessarily communicated well across teams, I feel like there's a lot of us that have been in this position where teams don't necessarily communicate the best. But you're right. It is understandable that the casting director, if they don't know, isn't going to know that this is what they're supposed to be looking for, especially in a job where you're supposed to go by aesthetics, right? You want to see how things play off and how you can highlight the clothes in the best light.
But, and a lot of the casting agents they are kind of old school in their way of casting and what they're looking for. And sometimes their way of looking at diversity and being inclusive of that is more about size and color, or not necessarily ability. So
those they focus on the visual differences as opposed to, visual diversity, as opposed to, something that might not be apparent, right?
Yeah. So in that sense, and into the day, I worked with that brand for over 2 years, but I got turned down for every single modeling job with that same brand. But yeah, I was even an ambassador for the brand for a whole 12 months on their influencer side, but not on no work modeling side.
That is bonkers. Like, absolutely crazy.
Yeah. All right, so it's just those two things sometimes. So this is like the yin and the yang there. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what that outreach looks like from brands. Do you have any tips or any kind of best practices for brands if they want to collaborate with somebody who is disabled? How does that outreach need to be handled to communicate that this is a safe space for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I think reach out to them. On social media, there's lots of influencers, models out there who are just, disabled. But it would also help if you have people on your team that is also disabled, so that they make sure that they get the language correct and they don't necessarily feel like, because I feel like sometimes they're like, oh, I'm not too sure, I don't want to offend.
Yeah.
But by saying a particular word, for example, and you're like, okay, but if you had someone on a team that you can ask, or be like, how do we, what's the dialogue we should use here, then that would help massively. I think it's not enough just saying, oh, I didn't reach out because I didn't know what to say, or I didn't know how to put it across. Like, if that's the case, be general in there, better off being general in the email, saying, you know what, we found you on social media. We quite like you to come and model for us. I think what you're doing is great. And then when you all are you free to jump on a call? You can have that conversation. And at the same time, you know, that person will more than likely be happy to tell you exactly the lingo that is correct and which dialogue is correct for you to use in terms of that person, because everybody is different. Everybody has a different terminology that they want to be represented by. Some people don't mind people with disabilities, and people are like, no, I prefer disabled person. So it literally just does it, you know, it just depends. Me, myself, I don't mind people with disabilities or disabled person, wheelchair user, but I am not wheelchair bound, so that's out of question.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so it's just like, you know, at the same time, you can also ask them, how would you like to be referenced? You know, it's a simple conversation and
Yes.
nobody will be offended. They just will not be offended. They wouldn't be offended. They actually would be like, oh, thank you for asking. Yeah.
Well, it's a basic thing, right? It's like when you're introducing yourself to someone, and like my dad, his name is Michael. He doesn't go by Michael, he goes by Mike. So like that's how he introduces himself. It
Yeah.
is, you know, it's one of those things that is very simple. It's not a huge change that needs to be made, but it has such larger implications, right? Of feeling like you are actually going to be consulted, feeling like you're not going to be talked at, but talked to about this. And you know, you raise a really good point. There are as many people as there are within the neurodivergent community and the disabled community, you will find just as many ways that people like to be responded or like to be addressed. Person first language was huge, at least in America, for, you know, like social work and public programmings and that kind of thing. It's now started to become identity first language, but it really just depends on what that person prefers. So I like that. I
Yeah.
like that idea of like reaching out in a little bit more of a general way, especially if you're not quite sure how you want to say this to the person. But I also very much appreciate that idea of, like we talked about with our attendees for today's event, you know, lead from a place of kindness and respect and ask the questions, ask them respectfully, and listen to what the answers are given. You know, listen to what this person has to tell you about how they prefer to be addressed, what kind of needs or accommodations they might need. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the logistics, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier with your example. What can brands do to make the logistics of such a collaboration a smooth experience? People had written in with questions regarding a photo shoot or sponsored posts. So what would you say to brands about the logistics and how to make that smoother?
Yeah. So in terms of, so if we're going to a shoot, it's on location, it's in the studio, send a car. You're going to send a car to other people, you can send a car, right? There's always, I mean, especially over here in London, there are black taxi cabs. All black taxi cabs have ramps. So you can phone up. There's various different black taxi companies. Like you can phone up, book a taxi in advance. You know, I've had brands, they send me a car. So, okay, we're going to send you a car at this time. The black taxi's there. He's ready to go. Take me to the shoot or the event. Sometimes also I go to events as well, and they also sort out cars. And not just because I'm disabled, but because they were all doing that for everybody. And I think it's important if you're doing it for the others that you do that as well. If you're in terms of travel, you know, cover the travel as well. You know, cover the travel because it can be, as a disabled person, like it's pricey. Life is pricey.
Oh yeah.
Our cost of living is slightly higher. And you know, especially in terms of getting around and stuff like that, it might not be necessarily so easy. Buses can be a bit of a pain with people kind of in the way and full, and you have to wait for another one, and it could be so. Just kind of be flexible, I would say, in that sense, in terms of the logistics of getting from A to B, and that would kind of, you know, help. But I definitely feel like ask them what they need. Do they need an assistant to help them get ready? Do they need, you know, like, are they bringing a carer? Like all these other things that they can ask. And it's not like just, and it could be just a simple thing like, tell me what you need for the day. We're going to shoot at this time. What do you need? Is it better for you to come in the morning or the afternoon? You know, like these are the questions that can be asked, and it's so simple. It's non-offensive. Nobody would find that offensive. You know, we've got this shoot. It's a group shoot. Would you prefer to come in the evening, in the afternoon, late afternoon, so that the people that was there in the morning, they can hang around. You come in, you shoot your bit, and then you could do like a group shot. Some people prefer to come slap bang in the middle, and some people prefer to like, oh, actually, can I come first thing in the morning? Because like you know, with my condition, it's better for me, or medication, or travel wise. It just makes sense. Just ask the question. People are very open and willing for you to learn there, and they're willing to kind of just teach what's necessary to make it all accessible and for everybody on the shoot to feel comfortable, because that's what's important at the end of the day, is that we are made to feel to be comfortable as much as possible.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely of prime importance here. All right. One of the last questions we got, and please feel free, you know, if y'all have questions,
Yeah,
please feel free
sure.
to throw that into the chat. We'd had a couple of comments from people. Anesha had said, I'll never get over the term wheelchair bound. And I think that's huge. It's right. It's one of those things that people they don't understand that language is so important when you talk about these things, right? Saying that somebody uses a wheelchair as opposed to they're in a wheelchair. Like it's small, right? There's small changes.
Yeah. And it's those little small nuances of languages that we could just kind of tweak. Words are powerful. And as somebody who haven't been disabled all my life, but had been disabled for the last like nearly 17 years, I have lived both sides of the coin, and I can see that like why people would be offended by certain language used in regard not just for disability, but it also makes you realize how powerful words are when it is that important to you about the words used to describe yourself, kind of thing. You don't really think about it, kind of be flippantly. I mean, oh, I just ran down the road now, and like it's just it doesn't mean I literally ran down the road, but it's just it's one of those flippant words and that you might use in a sentence, especially in England. Like, oh, I just jumped on a bus. You didn't literally just jump on the bus. In other words, you quickly got on the bus, you know. And then sometimes like, and it was like, I remember when I first became a wheelchair user, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna run down the road and jump on the bus, and people will look at me and I'm like, well, how are you gonna do that? And I'm like, I mean, literally. And then then you realize, and it's at that point you're like, okay, like, you know, words are deep, and they are important. And it's amazing how people just flippantly say something which they didn't, much as I understand that they didn't mean to offend, they have. So I think it's very wise for people to just kind of be more mindful in the words that they used. We've seen it recently with certain artists having to change words in their songs, you know, from using certain words. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, language, I definitely feel like language is important, and I feel that you know, we can all do better. You know, we can all learn. Every day's a learning day. We never stop learning.
Exactly. All right. Our last question that we have here. Do you think that brands that collaborate with disabled creators should ensure that creators get sign off on the final product before releasing it? So can you give us some context here? Is this something that normally happens within your field, or within, any roles you've played as a model or as an influencer, where that collaboration, the product of that, is shared with you before it's published?
Could you just clarify in what terms?
So should brands who collaborate with disabled creators ensure that those creators get approval on that final product before releasing it?
Well, I've always have done. It's quite as so I'm a little confused, because like, you create the content, you send it to the brand, they approve it before you post. Or do you mean the other way around?
I think the other way around. I think it's
But
more
even
like if you
still,
are,
like I've never worked on a campaign and be like, oh, like and they're like, well, these are the images, and be like, oh, you happy with them? Yeah. Oh my gosh, they look amazing. That's
okay.
all. Is that like yeah?
I don't
Sorry.
think, okay, so as somebody who's outside of this, I don't think that that's necessarily clear. I feel like a lot of us have this impression that like the models show up and then everybody else does whatever they want, and the models are then not consulted or not included in the process down the road, right? Like you've signed a contract and you're there for the shoot, but it doesn't necessarily have like, you don't necessarily have veto power. Is that not how it is?
Well, okay, I see I understand where you're coming from now. And like as a because you said creator, so I was like,
Yes.
but
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah, because that so as a content creator, you would, and even if they hired you as like an influencer, because sometimes you're doing a shoot, like I've done shoots for brands, but you're doing it as the influencer, you're doing it as you, so you get a say of your makeup and how you present and what you wear and stuff like that for us from the
Yeah.
brand. You have more of a say, and then therefore, yeah, they're like, well, what do they think of this? We're looking to go ahead with that. What do you think of that? And I'm like, yeah, what do you think of the caption? All of that stuff. This is what's going to be around it. What do you think? And you get to proof that. So yes, as a model, that doesn't necessarily happen because you are there to model. You're like a doll in a way. And that's not
Yeah.
really, and that's not about disability. That's just about the industry in itself.
Yeah.
You kind of have you get to look at the images of once you finish. They're like, oh, let's see it. And they're like, oh, amazing. And you might be like, well, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. Do you mind not using that one? And you can note it down and be like, okay, noted. If the photographer is nice and the casting director is nice, then they're happily be like, oh yeah, sure, like we'll make note of that. We don't really want you not liking it. But sometimes their vision,
Yeah.
there again is not necessarily not yours because you're not there as the influencer, you're there as the model. And so therefore you do have less of a say, but that's not really necessarily down to disabilities. That's just down to their vision. And sometimes I think for you to be happy with the vision that they're going through, I think communication is always a key. Make sure that everybody understands exactly what the vision is for that shoot so that everybody's on the same page. And
Kind of
so
like
that
setting
therefore you're not in
expectations.
a yeah, so therefore you're not in a position where I'm like, oh my goodness, this has gone live and I don't actually like it. You don't want to be in that. And so just
Yes.
kind of is it meant to be cheery? Is it meant to be more like, and those are the things that kind of will help people to just be more comfortable in the outcome of the shoot. But would it be nice to have a bit more of a say? Yes, but it also depends on, as I said, it depends on the terms that you're hired for. When you're
Yeah.
hired for you, like like famous people are hired for them, they have a say. But generally, when you're just hired as a model, that's kind of how it works,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Clara, it has been wonderful to get to spend the last half hour with you.